Want to know more about rock, jazz, rhythm, and blues? You got to start from the bottom up. The Bass Guitar Channel radio show with David C. Gross and Tom Semioli. Two bass road warriors tell tales, interview the greats, and spin more great music than you can shake a Chapman stick at. The Bass Guitar Channel radio show with your hosts, David C. Gross and Tom Semioli, every Monday at 8 on Cygnus Radio.
Hi, this is David Gross for the Bass Guitar Channel radio show on CygnusRadio.com, along with head honcho Tom Semioli of Know Your Bass Player. Tonight we have Rudy Sarzo. Rudy's a great bass player. He's played with everyone from Ozzy to Quiet Riot to Whitesnake, and he's an educator as well. So let's get started. Hi, Tom. Hi, Rudy.
How you guys doing?
We're doing great. We were just commenting that bass players, we interview bass players, we are bass players. And bass players, for the most part, David, Rudy, they show up on time.
Yes, I'm usually the first one in the lobby.
Exactly. First one on the session.
Yes. You know, it's kind of like playing music. You don't want to be late with your playing behind the beat.
Right, David. See, we play on top of the beat, David.
Top of the beat. Be on the beat. Yeah, and it depends. It really depends. That's a good observation that you just made. Because I'm Cuban. Musically, from listening to the music and my living in Cuba, Cuban music, it was in front of the beat, behind the beat. We call it tumbao. You know, like if you listen to cachao, there's a swing to it. And since we don't have a kick drum, there's no clash of like, which is, you know, now it's becoming popular for certain hip hop and urban artists to have the kick and the bass, whatever bass it happens to be in hip hop, which is usually a synth, a little bit off. You know, it's kind of like a new thing. And what was that artist that Peter Palladino did a record with? Was it Neo?
D'Angelo. Was it D'Angelo?
D'Angelo. Right. They have that going on, you know. So that's like a there, but it's been around. That sort of thing.
It's interesting that you bring up that record because we all have to thank Pino for bringing the Fender bass back into the pop. You know,
you mean the passive Fender bass? Yeah,
yes,
definitely. Yes. Yeah. I'm one of those guys who was guilty in the '70s to keep up with the modern tones of the '70s. To Frankenstein my '67 Jazz and stick in a preamp in it. You know,
of course. But Rudy, you have to understand, I started playing bass in the 70s. David is a product of the 70s. It really wasn't a bass until you drilled a hole in it. You had to strip the paint off. You had to pull all the hardware off. You had to change the pickups. In my case, I pulled out the frets. I realized that wasn't Jocko. Put the frets back in. Right? I mean, that's,
it wasn't a Fender. It wasn't a Fender until you removed the bridge and put a badass.
Oh, I have my Leo Quan, of course.
And this is why my 59 remains. Wow. I got this at Norman's. It's a 59. It's got the most beautiful precision neck ever.
That I think,
it's a slab board, a fretboard. And then we started making jazz until 61, I believe.
Correct. 60 was the Fender Deluxe, and then it was the Fender J.
Yeah, and I grew up playing jazz, and I was never really a big fan of precision basses.
Right.
I got to tell you, I wouldn't be surprised if they took this profile and used this profile on the Fender Jazz.
Okay.
And made the precision a little bit bigger, more like a Telecaster. Because this plays exactly, it feels just like a jazz bass, especially.
Is it a heavy instrument?
Well, it's heavier than the usual. It's heavier than a jazz, I would say. Right. I mean, being a precision, you got a different profile, curvature. But it's like, these are 59, so they're like 61, 62 years old pickups, and usually with the pickups, what happened, they got degraded, because of the wiring. And I found a way how to fix that. As you recall, back in the 60s and 70s, and even into the early 80s, there were no companies that made pedals specifically for bass. Right. So if we wanted chorusing or we wanted a certain effect, we have to use a guitar pedal. And that would drop down some of the bass, the lower end frequencies, So, but now there's so many pedals that we can have to actually work as a preamp would work if you would build it into the amplifier. I'm sorry, into the bass. Right. So it's you got so much flexibility now because you're not bound to, like, for example, I have the last Marcus Miller 4-string to leave the Fender factory.
Oh, okay.
I own that. There's a story attached to it. But I got to tell you, every time that I switch off the active setting and just go passive, just because of the pure reason that it bypasses the tones that you would have normally on a Fender Jazz, right? It doesn't sound the same. It's just basically just getting you're just getting volume and you're bypassing the tone knobs.
Basses that I have built for me now, I just have a volume knob put on.
Well, you know, that Sadowski, the jazz bass is really a Sadowski bass then.
When I used to play with Ozzy, I didn't have access to string companies that had like multiple gauges.
They only really made standard gauge in those days, right? 45 to 100, pretty much.
To 105, yeah. That was like the standard roto sound and even GHS boomers and stuff like that. So I was basically like, if we started tuning down, there would be songs, we go from E to E flat tuning, you know, and playing just with tuning in E all my life, all of a sudden, you know, 15, 20 years later, I'm playing half a step down. And from articulation, that was like very difficult to adapt, you know, because I could feel the lack of tension in the strings. So I started playing a fretless for the D tune.
The P bass fretless, the maple neck, yes.
Maple one, maple neck and maple body. And one night after playing that same bass on the same songs on the same tour, you know, for like 4 or 5 months, Ozzy turns to me on stage and goes, "Your bass doesn't have any bloody frets." It took him that long, you know.
At least he didn't ask you to play a Jocko solo.
Oh, no.
Well, that must have been interesting to play fretless in that context because, you know, with David and I, we always talk about the history of the fretless bass in a rock context. And, of course, we start off with Bill Wyman, right? He made the famous bass there. And then, of course, Jocko with Ian Hunter a few years later in the 70s. And then you did the P bass. How did you alter your style? Because it's not like you could just fly on automatic pilot with frets. You had to land in the proximity of the note. I landed on the note. You did? Okay.
Otherwise, somebody would say, you know, either the sound guy would say, "Listen, this is not working." And it did. You know, sometimes if you don't give things too much thought on the negativity and you just go for like, I got to make this work, and you make it work and you apply yourself and just approach it with a positive attitude rather than any doubts and uncertainty, you'll be fine. You'll be more than fine. You just do it, you know, basically.
Well, I also think because you were playing the P bass, your fingers knew essentially where the quote unquote frets would be in any event.
Yeah. I at that time I was playing, let's say, I had owned only one bass from 1967 until I started playing with Ozzy. That was my Fender 67, my Jazz. And then when I joined the band and we were getting ready to hit the road, Sharon said, "No, you can't go on the road with just one bass. What about if it breaks or whatever, blah, blah, blah." So I went across the street. I live in LA, and there was a store across the rehearsal place called Nadine's, which is actually still there, a music store. And I saw a Music Man Sabre on the wall and said, "Okay, I'll take that one," because it was active, and my Fender Jazz already was active. So I needed something to, you know, simulate the same level volume output. And I made that work. And also, you know, one thing that a lot of today's musicians don't take into consideration when they're listening to live recordings from the 70s and early 80s is the fact that most of us were using a Schaefer Vega wireless transmitter, which had a specific limiter, opto-limiter built into it. So I really did not need any compression because it was built into the unit. Not only that, you could actually regulate the volume output. So even if you had an analog, a passive bass, you could bring it up or bring the active down to match the same volume. So, you know, of course, I had 3 packs on 2 separate units. so I could change basses, maintain the same output.
Well, you know, what's interesting also with a fretless bass, there's a certain resonance, there's a certain tone to it. You're actually playing, sometimes you're playing the notes between the notes, and it almost in many ways adds different colors to the chord. So the fretless bass, when, especially in a hard rock context, when it's just you and a guitar player.
Yeah, it's actually a video professionally done, not an iPhone, because of course it's 1982. And it's of us, the Diary of the Madman tour with Brad Gillis on guitar, because it was planned while Randy was alive.
Yes.
and then he died, and we had to, we had this thing planned. So it was like, okay, let's do it. And of course, with Brad, that's the Diary of a Madman tour, which is when I started playing the fretless bass. I played it in 3 songs. There were the E flat tuning songs of the set, and they were actually songs from Diary of a Madman. The whole diary, except for SATO, is all tuned down to E flat. And one of the songs is Believer, and it's like, so you can really hear the fretless on that, which is a perfect song for that. Songs like Flying High Again or things like that. What happened with my tone back in the day with the fretless was that I was not getting a whole lot of fret noise on a E flat tuning, which is what I was getting with my jazz and my Sabre. I tried my Sabre down E flat, and the preamp was so bright. Back in the early 80s, PA systems were not aligned most of the time, which meant that the high frequencies that you get, like the upper harmonics and all the fret noise, will travel at a different time as the bass notes. So it sounded like you were not in sync. Yeah. Okay. Nowadays, everything is time aligned. Right. All the systems are, all the frequencies are time aligned. But we didn't have that back in 1981. That was basically with a Martin Bins, which was basically a band and a huge horn with a crossover, and that's it. That's what you got. They sounded great in smaller places, really, really beautiful. But once we started getting into bigger arenas, we didn't have the Harwell system yet. Once the Harwell system in mid 80s came in, like 84, because I remember using that with a Quiet Riot, then everything became in sync.
Do you think if they had been developed to the extent that they are now, that you would have considered using a 5-string with a low B?
I've used 5 strings. As a matter of fact, I play 6-string bass, but tuned like a guitar. And it's my favorite instrument, from E. Right. Okay. Yeah, it's a regular set of D'Addario 105s, I believe 165 XLs. And then I just put the B, I believe it's a 32 gauge and 28 or 26 on the high E.
Okay.
And I love it. I'm really, at heart, I'm really a guitar player.
Right. That's how you started off. Yeah. But it's interesting that Music Man would go on to develop, I think, probably one of the best 5s, which is the Stingray. It's nice weight distribution ergonomically. It's very similar to a P bass.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I have Fender was going to make a signature model for me in 95, and Mark Kendrick. I don't know if do you know Mark Kendrick, one of the master luthiers at the custom shop?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, Mark. Yeah, I went over to the custom shop. This is like in 1995. During an afternoon, we just had a conversation. He built the neck, and the process by hand. He just whittled it down, 5-string, and he just kept showing it to me. How does it feel? How does it feel to you? And until we got it down to where I felt comfortable. And yeah, I have it somewhere around here. It's in one of the bags. But anyways, it's a 5-string. So I've been playing 5-string for a long time. In 1990, I used a 5-string Peavey. I believe that there were 2 made, one with fret, one fretless. I still have the fretless 5-string, my own signature model. And I used that the fretted one on Slip of the Tongue, the Whitesnake record. Mm-hmm. And I used it on stage also. Yeah, I mean, to me, it's just another string. I mean, I don't have any... I have 5 strings laying around that when people send me tracks to play on, I audition my basses. As a matter of fact, I did a track recently, and I wanted to get something more of an acoustic bass. I mean, it's kind of like an upright. Yeah, this is my acoustic fretted version. There's also a fretless version, and it's got the Fishman preamp. Wow! And it just sounded beautiful. Because I don't want it to sound too much like a modern or even a bass guitar, like electric bass guitar. I I wanted to get the acoustic resonance to it. And I plugged it in, and it's terrific. All the things that I've been using lately is, I don't know if you can see this, but I used a Spark amp. Even before I got this amp made by Positive Grid, I'm a huge fan of their plugins. But I was having issues with any plugin because I use a Pro Tools 12 with my laptop. I don't have like the upper end hardware. So every time that I go into record, it bypasses the plugins, which means that I can't really hear exactly what my outcome of my tone is, right? The final tone, right? Because I will be recording dry. And then once you add the plug-in, well, that's not what you play to. You actually play to the dry tone. So your articulation, everything is completely different. What happens with this is the Spark, it has a USB output. So I can actually use the driver of the Positive Grid Spark and exactly what I hear going in. So I have the options of going in dry with no amplifier emulation or pedals, or I can do whatever I want. If I wanted to sound grindy, get like a Marshall type tone, I put in the Marshall preset with whatever pedal preset, and it sounds great. I love it.
If you look up Rudy Sarzo on a Quipboard, you break the internet faster than a Kardashian. I look at all the gear you use. The PV, the Spectre, I think Aria Pro used a Washburn on the video a long time ago, right? I believe it was. You've also had a hand in designing basses. What elements, when you go to design a bass, your signature basses, what are the essential elements of a Rudy bass?
Okay, great question. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. I own a lot of acoustic basses, and they all have great features. Yeah. But so I have a Guild, one of those Guilds from like the 90s that everybody was using on MTV Unplugged, all that. Yeah, I have that one. I have Ovation acoustic basses, and I have the Angelico. And
oh, those are nice. Yeah.
Yeah, they're beautiful basses. So what I did is I took everything that I like about the other basses and put it into one bass. The most important thing for me, as somebody who wanted to design something, I wanted to give the basses an option of having an acoustic bass that feels like an electric bass. Tension-wise.
Okay.
So when let's say you're in the middle of a set and you've been playing your electric Fender bass, right?
Right.
And then now we're going to unplug and we're going to like chill and play, sitting down or whatever. Then all of a sudden, I would have to adjust to the feel of the acoustic bass. And then going like, wow, this is going to take me, half a song to get into that vibe, Yeah. And so the first thing we wanted to do is to create an instrument that had exactly that tension. So your articulation remains exactly the same.
That's important. That's real important.
Super important. I also wanted to have something that usually the hole is in the front. I can't hear the front. I want to hear what I'm playing. So
that is genius right there, David.
Well, I mean, I've seen instruments, not just basses, but guitars that have that. So I said, you know what? Let's do this right here. And of course, it's a bass, so there'll be no question. What is that? It's a bass. And another thing is I'm not going to name the company, but I have basses that you see frets on the instrument. You can't play them. You can't play them because there's no cutaway to reach. Yeah. So you're trying to do that. And it's ridiculous. So I say, okay, if I'm going to have frets on a bass that I design, I want them to be playable. Yeah, so I don't have a strap on now, and I got the cable from my iPhone in the middle here. So I'll try to do my best, but just basically,
Nice tone.
Yeah. Oh no, it's beautiful. And what's beautiful also about these preamps, the Fishman, is that as a preamp and a pickup, it should really magnify the true tone of the instrument, especially if you have something that naturally sounds really good. So it does that beautifully. Just amplifies the natural sound of the instrument. And I'm speaking from experience because I worked with different manufacturers in the 80s because I'm a fan. I'm a fan of music. I'm a fan of the instruments. A couple of creations from Fender, from Leo, and whoever was responsible. Let's say, Les Paul with a guitar.
Sure.
That they created timeless piece instruments.
Yes, absolutely.
When I was given the opportunity to create something, I did two things. I wanted to be so different that my first signature model was the Washburn with the stripes.
Yeah,
right?
that's the one I was referring to. Yes.
Yeah, it's very different. But one thing I learned from experience after designing that instrument is that I'm not going to walk into a wedding and see somebody playing that, wearing a tuxedo,
That's
it's an 80s bass.
It's something that,
it is of its time. And I said, okay. So I moved on. Then I started working with PV. I was working with PV on the amplifier side for a long time.
Oh, yeah. They were important company.
Oh, yeah. Wonderful. As a matter of fact, I started playing PV in 83. Yeah, 83. Yeah. They were wonderful, incredible amplifiers. One day I'm over at Hartley PV's house with Malia, his wife at the time, and Adrian Vandenberg and me. We were on a break from Whitesnake, little day off. And Hartley goes, listen, I really do. My dream is to really have the PV brand associated with guitars.
Okay.
Not just amplifiers. Mm-hmm. So he asked Adrian and me to design a bass for them. I mean, for me, a bass, and Adrian a guitar. It took about a year to do that because anything that you design really quickly, it's not going to be a long-lasting, timeless design.
Right. You got to make prototypes. You
got to make prototypes. And the most important thing at the time for me was the electronics. Because it was a time, I think it was like the epitome of the bass tone of everything going into that radical alembic-ish preamp, everything. Passive basses did not exist anymore, especially on radio. Because what happened in the 80s, bass players' biggest competition was the keyboard player playing a synth.
We had to cut through all that.
Oh, yeah. Well, not only that, and I'm going to give you this is what I experienced, having artist relation and producers. The artist, the A&R guy, the guy who's actually in charge of your record, he's got checkpoints, little boxes to check about the record. And one of them is, do I have 4 singles? Especially back then. They weren't even singles. They were MTV videos. Do I have 4 videos on this record? Okay, sonically, where are these songs going to sit in a playlist? If you're going to follow the Thompson Twins, who is, I just named Thompson Twins because it's got that keyboard bass
They were a heavy synth band that were very popular.
Okay, sure. Sonically, you have to sound similar. So you follow one song after the other, and there's not a drop in energy or tonal energy. It's got punch, right? Yeah. So all of a sudden, I'm a bass guitar player. I got to compete with this keyboard that really, there's some sort of let's say, if you want to sound like John Bonham, you got to play like John Bonham. If you want to sound like robust in your playing, you got to play robust. You got to have a certain energy in your hands that transfers into the instrument, right? Your best ally is going to be electronic enhancement, tonal electronic enhancement. From pickups to preamps. And that's what took the longest. It was all about creating an instrument that sounded unique. And by sounding unique, it's like this. Okay, you have a palette, with colors.
Yes.
So I got together with Mike Powers and Jim DeCola and some of the other luthiers at PV at the time. And we were talking about what do we want this bass to sound like? And I said, okay, how about if we take as the primary colors 3 very distinct of its time pickups that I was actually using some of them, like the Olympics. I used to put Olympic pickups and preamps in my arias. I also had arias with Bartolini. Because Bill used to build my pickups, hand-built back in the day, and I had Stars Guitars in San Francisco build my basses basically when I was playing with Washburn and later on with Arias and stuff like that. So we were looking at 3 EMGs, Bartolini's, and Olympics, and we're looking at their curves, there where the frequencies lay. So we took those 3 primary colors and we made one color out of that.
Okay.
Like if you mix colors, you're going to get another color, but they're related to. Doing things like that, especially when you're on the road, touring with a band around the world, it takes time. It takes time. But fortunately, they had a really wonderful custom shop at PV, and every bass that they built was exactly like the one I played on stage. So that's another thing that I wanted to do, that it was a failure of me understanding the business, especially working with an OEM, because when I was working with Washburn in the early 80s, everything was manufactured overseas. And according to whatever factory they were working with, that was the quality of the instrument. Whereas with Peavey being based out of Meridian, one shop, everything was built there. The quality control was incredible.
Well, that was one of the confusing things and limiting things about signature models back then, because you'd ultimately get, let's say, a P bass, and then you go, I need this, and this added to it. So what you were using had absolutely nothing to, I mean, Marcus Miller is a perfect example. Their basses, the Marcus Miller's signature literally was different than his Marcus Miller bass. Mm-hmm. And it took time for them to actually create exactly what was there. And it definitely takes time.
It does. The one that I have, it was actually a Japanese. The 4 strings were built in Japan, and the 5 strings were built at in Corona. So mine, the story with mine is they used mine, the one that I have, as the template to take to Mexico, and use that as the Mexican made Marcus Miller, MM.
Right.
and then they brought it back to Corona, and it was sitting in a corner of somebody's office for 20 years, until one day I was talking to a friend of mine, a Fender, and he says, I was asking him, do you guys have any Marcus Millers and anywhere in the factory? And he goes, let me get back to you. It calls me there a couple of days later and says, well, we found the last one. And it was like in a pile. It was like lumber sitting there, like piles of guitars and basses. And it goes, oh, here it is, 20 years later. Yeah.
Wow. Amazing story. Rudy, you and I have a couple of things in common. We're both bass players. We're identical twins, wouldn't you say, right? I get mistaken for Rudy all the time, David. Did you know that?
I see similarities. Yes, I do.
But we both spent a significant amount of time in a place called Miami. And I know you went to Miami-Dade.
Yeah.
I went to University of Miami. I didn't major in music because I didn't want to waste all my parents' money. But one of the things, when you look at the city of Miami, what a diverse, rich musical culture it is. When people talk about great musical cities, they say Nashville, New York, L.A., London. But to me, when you look at Miami, the Afro-Cuban influences, you go back, there's the blues, rhythm and blues, jazz, the Deep South. So you're going to get country and folk. Miami is a really unique musical city. It's a port city. It's a tourist city. It's an entertainment city. And that's kind of where, you did your apprenticeship in. And comment on the fact that there's so much happening there in terms of diverse influence.
That's really a great observation, because I haven't really thought about this in a while or ever. Because it is what it is, Yeah. I mean, it's like people ask me, what was it like playing with Randy Rhoads? And I thought about it and went, wow, that's what I knew. I get up in the morning, go on stage with Ozzy, I'm playing with Randy Rhoads.
Yeah.
It's not until he wasn't there anymore that you gotta go, oh my God.
You reflect on it, yeah.
Yeah, because it's impossible. You don't even think about replacing him. Yeah. But this is what I did. It's kind of like if you're the Queen of England, this is all you know. You're the Queen of England.
Right.
So being in Miami,
he was a great bass player too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, John Deacon.
John Deacon. He is a great bass player. I love John. And but anyways, being in Miami, I just thought about it because you mentioned a few Afro influences, which being the blues and R&B and gospel, also funk and Afro-Cuban, and I can add reggae.
That too.
Island styles.
Yeah.
I mean, it was,
musical melting pot in many ways.
Plus, I'm talking about 60s and early 70s for me. So disco came to Florida before, it went from New York,
right,
from that Stonewall area, New York, down to, we had our own Stonewall in South Beach.
Yeah, South Beach, sure.
Yeah. It started in the gay community. The gay clubs, disco. And one day I was at the rock club, the Flame Machine up in Fort Lauderdale.
Okay.
And we look around and there's no girls. All the girls had disappeared. It was like, where are they? And somebody said, they're at the gay club down the street. So we dashed over to the gay club and there they are dancing with all the gay guys, And we go, and so we start to infiltrate the gay clubs just because that's what the women were. And then all of a sudden you start listening to this music and you go like, wow, this is cool, especially for bass players.
It's all bass music, yeah.
It was incredible. And then all of a sudden we had a club circuit down there called Big Daddy's.
Oh, yeah.
And if you really, for us to play at the Flying Machine with whatever band I was in, it was like, maybe 2 or 3 times a month because they have many local bands. But if you wanted to work every day, be in the circuit, these Big Daddy's lounges were a circuit all over Florida.
But so the top 40 was it called?
Top 40.
And I did my apprenticeship there. I'm sure you remember Coconut Grove, the Strip.
Oh, yeah.
The Fountain Blue, right? Marco Polo.
Yeah.
The Newport.
I played the Marco Polo. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I played the Castaways across the street. The Castaways.
Yeah. That was the circuit. And, what better way, an apprenticeship, because you've got to keep the customer drinking and you got to keep the customer dancing, right? So, you have to be adept at different styles. You got to go from disco to jazz to R&B. You got to play a dinner set. You got to play a dance set.
Yes, you got to play top 40. So if you're having my baby, it's on the top 40. You got to play that song, right. Followed by the OJs. Followed by the OJs.
Some of the great music that came out of Miami in the disco era. You had Casey and the Sunshine Band.
Yeah,
posted on all those Blowfly.
The Bee Gees. Yes.
Yeah. Also. Gloria Estefan.
Yeah,
my classmates were in.
But, it's funny because I was at the Hallandale Pap Festival in '69. Do you remember that?
With Hendrix?
Yep. Three Dog Night, Iron Butterfly. There was more STP going around the stadium. I'm telling you. But, the thing is, we're talking top 40, but what was really interesting is that was also on the charts. You would have Kiss, Frank Sinatra, Engelbert Humperdinck, you name
Thomas
it.
Summer,
There was no isolation as there is today. And, another thing, Rudy, that I was thinking about, you're from, just like I am, from the pre-Jocko days. So, and the pre-YouTube days. We actually learned to read music. We actually learned all of those things that are basically bypassed now with both tablature and, hey, let's go on YouTube. We'll learn the notes to the song.
Yeah. I learned mostly by ear, and it wasn't until I went to college that I actually took sight reading. Yeah. But by then I was so advanced with if you listen to, let's say, Midnight Hour, you can pick up, in a couple of listens, what's going on with the bass. I didn't need sheet music for that. So playing a lot of the top 40 it was not a requisite to sight read.
Right.
And I got to tell you, I believe in academia, which is the proper, sequence of information being sponged by the student. But in my case, by the time that I went to college, I had already been playing for so long, I could transcribe by just listening. And school slowed me down because I was playing more advanced music at night in the clubs than I was at daytime in the school. So that's why I changed my major from music and made music a minor, and my major became mass communication, which helped me incredibly 10 years later. And I still does today. It was radio, television, and motion picture producing and directing. So what happened was we had these snowbirds executives that had retired in Florida. This is in 69, 70. I started going to Miami-Dade in 69, graduated in 70s, 71, 72. And so we had these really hip guys that were successful and as our teachers, our mentors, and we had our own television studio, our own radio station that would broadcast to the local school. And back then, the DJ was actually a guy who played the record, and your job as the announcer was to talk, introduce the songs, and play the commercial. Right. We had cartridges, right. And then you have to log everything down, And so you learn that also for television. I learned lighting, kept being in front of the camera, behind the camera, the same thing with a motion picture. And so I never got to use it until 10 years later in the 80s when I first joined Ozzy. I look at the lighting rig and I go, oh my God, this is exactly like television. You got the 3 points of light. You got your backlighting, you got your sides, you got your fronts. The gels that they use, our lighting guy used to like put little X's on stage where the lights were going to hit. Every day they would calibrate and change the gels. And then you have the super troopers, the follow spots. I learned to always be seen on stage, because if you're going to be on stage, you want to be remembered.
Right. It's part of the art form.
Yeah. If you're going to be seen by the audience, people are not going to pay attention. So always be there where there's light, even if it's from behind as a silhouette, And once it came time to make videos, it's like, I know this.
Right, you're at home.
I studied this in school. Yeah, I'm at home in front of the camera. I know how to work the camera and all of that. So that really helped me in making videos, And now I have my own radio show, 6 Degrees of Sarzo on Monsters of Rock Radio.
Yes.
I studied that. So it was like the education that I got in college really helped me years later. I did not apply it immediately because, I became a musician, a professional musician. Right. And now I'm more of a multimedia person.
Well, yeah, you're big into animation. I actually sent you something a little bit earlier today. One of my side hustles was bringing musicians into the New York City schools. And I realized how kids know absolutely nothing about the Great American Songbook. Mm-hmm. So I created this cartoon called Jazzin' in the Key of C, called C spelled S-E-A, with Thelonious Monkfish, Duke Ellington. And so we're trying to sell this as a cartoon. So I sent you a trailer. Take a look at it.
Love to see it, yeah.
You're big into animation yourself.
Yeah, and a lot of the technology, that's not only the technology, but the outcome of technology being available today to musicians to create and communicate, I could see that 20 years ago. I started working with companies, like one of them was NVIDIA. Another one was Avid. Person that was running a division of Avid at the time turned me on to this software called Softimage. I was trained in Softimage. And of course, it's kind of like driving a car. If you look at the console of any car, you can basically drive it. So looking at a console of any software, like let's say whether it's 3ds Max or Maya, Softimage or whatever, you can pretty much navigate it. Learning the essence of what computer, CG is. It's, let me put it this way. Right now, I am working on an animated project with a studio. We've been working on this for a while, but we became friends about a decade ago, and it led into like, this is the right time to do this now.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So even if something comes your way today and you go, what does this mean that this comes into my life? Just don't disregard it, because the time will show up sooner or later when you can actually use this.
Well, if you think about it, as bass players, we're harmony, we're rhythm, we're much in control. My wife's a filmmaker. When she's editing, she brings me in because there's a certain rhythm that is inherent in being a bassist where, this needs to flow here. When she's editing either TV or film, it's, hey, you need to do this here, cut that, because you can see the flow. And I think we're well suited for multimedia. I really believe that.
Absolutely.
Well, as a bass player, you have to know what everybody on the bandstand is doing.
Absolutely. That is so important what you're talking about, David. I got to tell you, I do a lot of interviews for my show, and I edit every single one of them. Edited for tempo, because one of the most important things that I wanted to really achieve with my interviews is to document stories of legendary music icons, whether they happen to be musicians or even executives, producers, and so on. And what happens is, human beings, a lot of us, when we're talking about the past, we go there and we go ask the individual. We don't visit the past. We relive the past.
Absolutely.
And what happens is there's a moment that you are transmitting the past that you're reliving to you today. And sometimes it takes time for the information to reach today, right?
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of pause, and then they give me the information.
Exactly.
Right? So
you
I listen.
Are perfect because I'm not getting any or the while you're thinking it through. And it's interesting. Someone was telling me, Steve Swallow, apparently, he slowed down a little bit, but instead of talking through or stuttering through, he'll pause in maybe 5 or 10 seconds. Mm-hmm. So not only can I hear the pause, I can see it. Oh, that's an I'm going to cut that out as well. You know what I mean?
Yes, because you want to present a tempo to the conversation.
Absolutely.
That's how you engage the listener.
Exactly. And I have to cut so much of Tom out. It's just
How true.
And I do it to myself too, because even though I take notes on my shows, with the to ask the guests, sometimes they'll say something that it will trigger me going like to my own place that relates to whatever they're talking about. And it's like, I'm there and I got pull myself back to the moment. Yeah. So there's that gap of like, wow. And instead of me, because there's so much to talk about, I don't want the show to be about me. I want it to be about the guest. I take myself out of the show and I go on to the next question rather than reply with, oh, yes, well, actually, in my case, blah, 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 blah. No, I want to document this person's story.
A case in point, we're going to be interviewing Ron Carter.
Oh, wow.
5 years of his life is miles. 5 years. He's been recording forever.
Right.
But when you see a lot of interviews or see whether it's in print or live, that's all they talk about. I said to Ron, you know what? You recorded a lot of stuff before. You recorded a lot of stuff after. Let's talk for a minute about Miles, but let's talk about other things. It's kind of like Tom and I were talking. We don't want to belabor the Randy roads. Your career is so much more than just that. It's important to know where you were and where you're going.
Where you came from. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And that's how we like to do the interviews, which is why I have to cut them out so much.
Thank you. You cut everything out. Everything I say, he cuts out. But,
you mentioned Randy, and I got to tell you, I'm in development as an individual, trying to deal with certain things about myself, how to rewire myself to be a better being being. And I struggled with the subject of Randy Rhoads for many years. And then I wrote a book and I got closure about it. And not realizing that I have been carrying all this emotions on my shoulders, for decades. And then I started doing podcasts, and the subject of Randy Rhoads will pop up, and people want to know. And so I have to address it. And I got to tell you, I used to go to that moment because they asked me about the crash. And I will go and get it and be me during that moment, reliving it. And I got to tell you, it was, living through it once is bad enough. Having to relive it, constantly during conversations. I've learned now when that subject comes up to actually visit instead of watching what's going on about the crash through my eyes of me 40 years ago. I visit and I see me and I see everybody else, but I don't have the same emotions. Because I am an observer.
Yeah, I get it.
And that's how I can deal with it now. Sure. But it took me a long time to be able to.
Sure it's PTSD. There's no doubt about
it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think we all have moments like that. Maybe not as severe as that, but we all have our own stuff.
Yeah. I'll tell you, bass related, music related, it's been revealed by myself to myself lately that I've been using a lot of my uprooting of being uprooted from my Latin culture, living in Cuba, born in Cuba, to coming to the unknown, loss of identity, assimilation, adaptation. And my best vehicle to release that PTSD has been playing metal, playing rock.
Yeah.
Because I could approach it from an anger, aggressiveness. Yeah. But here's the problem. That means that my approach to music, without me realizing it, has been more suitable for rock than it has been suitable for other forms of music that need a more gentle approach. And it is now that I'm able to separate them, because now I am aware. Don't bring, if I'm playing funk, don't bring my metal angst because of my PTSD. And again, I'm dealing with that. I'm trying to leave that behind because it's part of the past and not bring it into my present. So it will not become part of my future.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, Guess Who, some of that just, I mean, maybe an American Woman, but for the most part, you have to view it from a different perspective. You can't go into Guess Who music with that thing because it wasn't there to begin with, right?
Absolutely. I'll tell you how I go in with the Guess Who, because it was part of the soundtrack of my teenage years.
Yeah, it's great rock and roll.
Yeah. And this is what happened. When my family was relocated to New Jersey, because there was not enough jobs in Miami in 1961, 62, so we were relocated in 63. We wound up in West New York, New Jersey, which is across the river,
Yep.
But there was not a massive or a Latin community at the time. This is 1963. So it was mostly the same thing as in New York City, Polish and Italians and Irish and Germans. And the Afro-Americans was mostly in Newark, a little bit south of that. But basically that was my neighborhood. And me being Latino, one of the very few Latinos in West New York at the time, I was kind of like an outcast because it was more of a cultural, in school, especially in school. It's like the Italian kids hang out together and the Polish kids hang out together and so on. And it wasn't until the British invasion that the tribe was born. Yes. Rock and roll. Now it transcended cultures. Now everybody, if you're into the Beatles or the Stones or whoever, Dave Clark 5 on Ed Sullivan. Now you're also into Dave Clark 5 and listen to the Turtles, whatever was on Ed Sullivan that evening, and it was now music brought us all together.
Yeah, that's really perceptive, Rudy. That is the microcosm right there. That's it. Because anyone our age, now I'm just a few years younger than you, but just a few. We got the kid up in the corner.
A few minutes. Yeah, I'm the sheriff. The 61-year-old.
We could talk to anyone in our age group now. And anyone, whether they're Latin, whether they're Jewish, Polish, Martian, whatever. What were you doing on February 8th? It comes together.
Yeah.
And then 3 weeks later, it's the Dave Clark 5. And then it's the Kinks and the Searchers. That's where we're all the same. And that's why music is the universal language.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I had a very emotional moment. First time I played in Russia in 1994, which is shortly after the coming down of the wall. I was in Whitesnake and we did the White Nights Festival and outdoors, and to be able to play for fans. And there were a lot of older fans, guys who in the 70s, the 80s, they would get arrested for just even listening to rock and roll in somebody's basement, and they were crying. They were crying because for the first time they actually could experience this, and it was so emotional because it just gave me hope that maybe someday in my own country, in Cuba, things I will be able to do that too.
Yeah.
But I thought that, when the Stones played there, that was going to be, wow, this is going to be the big change. And it was everything was rejected afterwards by Cuba, the government, Castro and his brother. They just didn't want to know anything about it. And that's why it stopped.
Powerful.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is. Well, I mean,
had a similar experience, Rudy, when I was in Berlin in '89. East German TV came to interview us, but I didn't shut up. I kept asking them, so what was it like? And they would say, the girl who was interviewing us was saying, we used to sneak the records.
Sure.
And to think about it, how pervasive rock and roll was worldwide, and we didn't know. We wanted to get our hair long and play, but it's an amazing thing. It really is.
It is. It's not only is it powerful, but I've toured a lot in Russia through the years. And the first time that I was there on a long tour, not just a visit like I did with Whitesnake of one show or something like that, but an actual tour where I was hanging out for about a month with the local people working with the promoter. So we became friends, and you start conversation, and you start traveling around the country and noticing how beautiful the churches were in and how well taken care of they were. You know, like drive up into a village and it looked kind of funky, but the church was like beautiful and immaculate, gold leaf domes and all of that. I'm going like, yeah. I thought religion was not allowed in communist country. I mean, it was not allowed in Cuba. The person would say, well, what happened was Stalin, he knew that he could not take faith away from the people. Mm-hmm. So he just turned a blind eye to it and just, let him practice that. But it was under communism. Yeah, humanity, you cannot take their belief in a higher power and their connection with a higher power.
Yep.
You can't.
Exactly. Well put.
Yeah.
Well, Rudy, you mentioned, you say your chosen genre is metal, or is I think I like to refer to it as more hard music. But we're talking about Miami, and what an inclusive genre hard music is. When you think about it, think about Yngwie and Randy and Richie Blackmore bringing classical language to metal. Listen to Martin Barr, Jethro Tull, and Gentle Giant, hard music bringing folk. Jimi Hendrix bringing the blues and rhythm and blues. Right, a disciple of Buddy Guy to hard rock. Even the latter day Red Hot Chili Peppers, Faith No More, bringing funk into the hard rock. It seems like metal and hard music gets this reputation as being one thing, but it's actually a very diverse genre.
It is. It is very diverse. As a matter of fact, things that were not considered metal at the time, if you look back of it, when people ask me, in my opinion, what was the first heavy metal band I got into, I would say Jimi Hendrix. It was, first of all, it was like nothing I ever heard before. And if you listen to, let's say, Black Sabbath, if you listen to Bill Ward, the jazzy,
they swung. Bill and Geezer were swinging.
Yeah, we're swinging. And, if you listen to that first record, there's a lot of jazz and, influence, some blues influence, of course. They were a blues band when they were called Earth,
Yes.
And to me, that's what Hendrix did. Hendrix took basically a power trio. He played guitar like if it was the horn section. If you listen to Fire, that's a horn line. Listen to it, and then you got Mitch Mitchell doing all this jazz, big swing band era drumming.
Right.
And of course, Norm Redding keeping it down. And sometimes it will be actually Hendrix playing on the record,
Billy Cox. What about Billy Cox?
Later on, Billy Cox. Yeah. Absolutely. So it was like, to me, that melting pot, it was just happening right there. That's Hendrix. He'll do like experimental psychedelic recording, speeding up the tapes and doing all this backwards stuff. Wow. The Beatles were doing similar things like that too. But
I've always said Helter Skelter is the first heavy metal tune. If you think about it.
I was reading somewhere where Lennon claimed that Ticket to Ride was the Beatles' first heavy metal song. And I'm going like, yeah, but then again, it was like, I don't think it had so many elements like any Hendrix song from the Are You Experience record. There's so many elements going on in every track.
This is the Bass Guitar Channel radio show on CygnusRadio.com. Really got me if you think about it. Or think about I Need You with that.
Yeah.
It was always there.
Yeah, but the aggression that Hendrix brought to radio was like one of the very first artists to actually, in my opinion, looking back at it, to play in front of the beat rather than on top or behind the beat. Mm-hmm. It was like, if listen to Fire, it's not like an AC/DC song, It's pushes so much. It's unbelievable,
I never thought of that as a horn line, but you're absolutely right. That is because you can hear the stabs. Wop wop.
Yeah.
Well, think about it. Who did he play with? All the
rhythm and blues guys.
Obviously.
Yeah. Exactly. Those were incredible days. But then again, nowadays, I've been listening a lot to Post Malone lately because he just defines genres. We became so genre specific, especially in the 80s, when artists were expected to like make a big record. Like if you sell 5 platinum, record number 2 is going to be exactly like your first record, your second one, your third. Look at Def Leppard. I'm just using them as an example of, or AC/DC, that continuity of the style and sound. Don't deviate from that. Just keep doing what you're doing. The majority of the people, that is great. It identifies an identity. But if you look at the way music was in the 60s and 70s, you didn't expect the last Beatles record you bought to be exactly like the new one you were buying, or even Led Zeppelin. Yeah, once they go past Led Zeppelin 2, because 1 and 2 were kind of like similar, sure. You get into Led Zeppelin 3, that's a whole different ballgame. Yeah. And by the time you listen to Led Zeppelin 4, and then you listen to Houses of the Holy, that's like totally different. It's like, oh man.
And then comes Kashmir.
Yeah, I know. It's like, okay, great. And that was so wonderful because it was food for our soul to listen to new music, new styles, not having Led Zeppelin be, just a whole lot of love. Imagine if every record Led Zeppelin did sounded like, hey, whole lot of love,
Well, there'd only be 2 or 3 at that point.
Well, Rudy, you look back at your work with Ozzy, with Quiet Riot, with Whitesnake. That was also an important era for rock and roll because you still had the songcraft, you still had the musicianship, but now you were bringing back performance to the forefront because that era, we were coming out of the Grateful Dead and the Allman Brothers, who kept their heads down and playing. And all of a sudden, and again, with your multimedia experience, Whitesnake, Quiet Riot especially, and of course, Ozzy, you brought back theatrics. But again, you were improving, or I should say, adding to the language that was created by guys like Alice Cooper and David Bowie before you. It was not only a musical experience seeing those bands, but it was a theatrical experience.
Yeah, I would say the epitome of me experiencing that was with Ozzy. During the Diary of a Madman tour, we had that castle and we had a dwarf running around the stage. It was a zoo. And throwing meat at the audience, raw meat. But then again, you had Randy and Tommy Alders and Don Airey on stage.
Yeah, you all top shelf musicianship. I mean, this was no
great
gimmick.
Songs. And Ozzy, I mean, there's only one Ozzy, so it was like, I had the best seat in the house.
And Ozzy had a knack for picking the right musicians. He really did have a knack for picking people. He wouldn't just settle for anyone, I don't think.
Yeah. That's the freakish nature that he has to be able to sense that. He's a very metaphysical individual.
And then let me ask you, obviously, talk about the transition you made from playing clubs to going to big arenas, because as we know, when you're playing at a lower volume, you can play, more notes and things like that. But when you get into a stadium where you played maybe 8 notes, maybe you're only going to play 3 notes. Changing your playing style, was that a consideration when you went to the very, very, very big stages?
I played the same amount of notes with Ozzy in theaters as I did in stadiums. I mean, you had to.
Yeah.
I guess
you had to. We relied on really good monitor systems. That's one thing. I mean, we had a company called Tasco from England.
Okay.
That English sound that they had, it was very different from like Showco. Showco had a very American sound, very flat. The frequencies, it was more geared towards the Eagles, Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young, that more folky, flat, everything, in a certain perspective. Tasco, the English companies, sound companies, they were more towards the metal, a lot of punch, a lot of low end, that could also handle multiple tunings. Quiet Riot tour with Black Sabbath in 1984, we opened out for them. And that was one of the very first time that the Harwell system was introduced to the American market. And to stand in front of a stack, because the bottom, they were separated, they were split. The high end will be on top and the low end will be on the floor. Huge cabs. And to listen to Iommi playing D tune to D.
Yes, yeah.
It was like bigger than the Philharmonic Orchestra. Louder and punchier. So it really made a huge difference.
If that had anything to do with back in the 60s where Joe Meek was pioneering stuff in England. I wonder if Nasco basically played upon that and made that their thing.
Oh my God, there were some great recordings. So one of them, I believe, is the Hot Chocolate, the band Hot Chocolate. If you listen to those records, they're impeccable. They're timeless. You can hear everything. Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah.
I think the lead singer just passed away about a year
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Also, the fact that you're at 240, 220, Marshall amplifiers sound different in England than they do in the United States. Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
Talk about these artists, and we're talking about a generation we come from where the album format ruled. I spoke to Gary Shea, and it touches on something you said about Led Zeppelin. Like he said to me, if you listen to the Eagles and the only song you heard was Hotel California, that's all you think they did, just like Led Zeppelin if you did A Whole Lot of Love. We came of the album format. Now we're in a world where everything is streamed and everything is playlisted. But again, we're in a situation where now the artist can go directly to the audience rather than having to go through the filter of a record company. So with digital technology, with streaming, with the streaming services, is it the best of times or the worst of times? Or is it a combination of both?
For creativity's sake, it's the best of times. Mm-hmm. For business sake, not necessarily so, because we used to have some genius executives.
Yeah.
Lately I've been watching the Aretha Franklin miniseries, on National Geographic, and her relationship with Jerry Wexler. I've worked with people, not necessarily Jerry, but definitely let's say John Collette as an artist relation person. Is the type of people that they come into your life, and first of all, you have to look at what they've done with other artists successfully. And then they come into your life and they apply the same principles, same passion to what you're doing. And it makes a tremendous difference. They see things in the bigger picture. Now, the artist is so consumed in the creation of it that you're going to create whatever comes out of you, whether it be good or bad or not, of half-baked. Whereas individuals like that, they take a look at you and say, you know what, that could be better. You can do better than this. Because to be creative, you cannot be applying your critical mind because you never get anything done. You won't go past the first measure of your song. First, you have to let it pour out, comes out. Okay, this is me. I'm not being critical. I'm getting messages. I'm getting ideas. Okay, put him down, record him, whatever, write him down. Okay, good. Now, what you have to do, wait until next day, look back or listen back to what just came out of you, and then you put on your critical hat. If you don't have an individual like a John Collette or a Jerry Wexler around to say, it could be better. The objective, yeah. So what we used to have back in the day is we could just be as creative as possible and always know that our lifeline was going to be somebody who was going to come in and say, no, that's not as good as what you can create. So nowadays you have to be everything to your creation.
Mm-hmm. And do you think the album format you talk about track sequencing, not every song needs to be a single. You have some that are mood pieces. You have some songs are for platforms for improvisation. Is the album format now still relevant, you think?
Well, I think whether you call it an album or not, it still exists. If you're working in a concept of, I have these photos. If you look at a record, tracks are actually photos of you at that moment in your career or in your life that you've taken, but they are digital prints, musical digital prints. They're messages they create. When you listen to a song, I see images when I listen to a song, whether I get if it's a classic song, I see images of when I first heard that song that I relate with, connect with, or at the moment. If I hear a song for the very first time right now, that song is going to remind me of our conversation. It's a snapshot of what's happening at the moment, right? So as an artist, when you're creating this, these are snapshots that you put into an album. And just like a photo album, you say, oh, this is who we were at that moment in time. That's why I am not a big believer or a big fan of greatest hits, taking photos from different albums of okay, let me see, when 1971, you took these pictures, okay, we're going to put them right here. We're going to take two, the ones that I like the most. I'm going to take these other two photos from this other album from 1973 and put them right here because I like those. There's not continuity.
Right.
Yeah.
And you grew up with that synchronicity of, okay, well, oobla-dee, oobla-da comes before. It can be confusing. But you said something very, very interesting, because I've always been of the feeling that no other art form can you pinpoint the exact moment. For instance, you go to the Louvre, you see the Mona Lisa. The next time you see the Mona Lisa, you go, I was wearing those red pants with the boots. But when you listen to a song, boom, immediately, it's all in front of you. It's a remarkable thing, don't you think?
It really is. And interesting that you brought up a painting, because colors have vibrations. That's why we see vibrations, But music, since it's waves that hit our body, we absorb that into our DNA. It becomes part of who we are. You know how environment can change your DNA?
Sure.
Well, music creates an environment. We have energy that surrounds us, right? Yeah. So we have these waves that are coming through the speakers or through the headphones, and we're still vibrating from them, because the vibration is caused. Like right now, I'm listening to you guys with headphones, so my vibration is from the inside out, rather than being a vibration that I'm hearing our conversation. Like if we were in the same room, I would be feeling it in my body.
Yeah, much different. Sure.
It's a much different experience, which is something that I had to learn when I started doing Zoom. My first interview in Zoom, I felt so disconnected. Now I don't, because I've learned how to connect, have an experience through the screen, because I had to learn how to do that. It wasn't something like, say, okay, well, I don't like Zoom, I can't connect. See, I'm not doing more Zoom. No, it's like, I got to do Zoom, for my interviews. I got to find a way, not only to connect, but to be able to maintain a connection with the person that I have as my guest on the show.
Exactly.
And the platform will improve. I think we'll have better audio, better video very, very soon, because Zoom is here to stay. I think so, yeah.
Absolutely. But what I'm talking about is that experience when you're in the same room, the body language. Mm-hmm. You have
the intangibles.
The intangible. And let's say when I was doing it in the studio in person, the person was like 3-4 feet away from me. So if you're looking at our vibrations, our energy fields, we're actually overlapped into each other's energy fields. So we have that certain vibratory connection.
You miss that in the Zoom, unless, as we've all now gotten to the point where, we're Zooming,
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Different, but the same, if that'll work.
Yeah, but we had to work at it. We had to adapt to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Good point.
No, Rudy, on some of the YouTube, when I see you there, I love when you take a solo break, you'll quote School Days. I think I've seen you do Birdland in some of your solos. And one of David and I's big things when we talk about the instrument is how important the history of the instrument is. That, you should, if I say to Rudy on a session, if I hire you for a session, I say, Rudy, can you give me a little McCartney on the verse? Can I get a little Jocko on the chorus? Can I get a little Entwistle on the coda? Or maybe Jamerson in the bridge? You understand what I'm talking about. What about bass education in the sense that people should know certain players? Who are the players you think everyone should know?
Well, before I answer that, I need to go back to the origin of why you see that on YouTube. When I joined Blue Oyster Cult, it's traditional that during Godzilla, there's a
Joe
bass
Bouchard
solo.
Used to do the
There's a bass solo there, right? So the bass solo in Godzilla has been there since the last millennium.
This band was destroyed by Godzilla.
Yeah, exactly. So it was like I joined the band, and it was like first time I played with BOC, I got a phone call, and they go, we need a bass player. Can you come in next weekend? Oh yeah, okay. They send me like 40 songs to learn. Because Eric Bloom writes the set list 5 minutes before they go on stage. I mean, there's some staples like every night there's going to be Godzilla,
as it should,
Burning for You, and the Reaper, and maybe one more, right? Okay, everything else is brand new. Whatever he feels like it, he just feels the vibe.
Good, that's good.
And so so I did that show, and then I got hired. I said, okay, if you want to stay on, you can be the bass player. Okay, great. And so they said, but, you need to come up with a bass solo tonight on Godzilla, the following gig. And I go, okay. So I just went to my warm-up noodling.
Yeah.
And and then Eric, a couple of shows later, he goes, you know what? Let's do this. Let me announce you. I'm going to bring up the bands that you play with, like Ozzy, Quiet Riot, and Whitesnake, and we'll do snippets of the songs. Like we would do like everybody remembers Rudy. When he played with Ozzy Osbourne, and then we go gang gang. We do a little bit of Crazy Train, then end that and go. And of course, you remember him from Quiet Riot. And we're going to come on, feel the noise, and then, and then Whitesnake, whatever. Yeah. And so that's why it's on YouTube. It had nothing to do with me. It was Eric coming up with these ideas of how to incorporate that into the show. Okay. So now that I got to drag myself from Rudy.
The disclaimer is through.
The Rudy disclaimer. I think it's great. Go ahead.
But as far as bass players, I mean, oh my God, it's, I look at music personally. It's a quantum experience. Quantum being that I can be just as excited right now if I put on Vanilla Fudge, first record, Tim Bogart playing bass, and I go, my God, this is incredible. Today, as I did maybe 50 years ago, maybe even longer, right? It has the same impact. But now I can listen to it and I can hear it better, understand better what he's actually playing,
right?
And which is basically John Coltrane on bass and being a saxophone player, and so it's like the same experience emotionally, or listening to God Only Knows, the Beach Boys. It has the same emotional impact at this moment as it did first time I ever heard it, without attaching any particular experience except the music. It has nothing to do with a girlfriend or any traumatic experience I had. It's purely that you're hearing it and you go like, you're in a different world. It's a world that it's like Alice in Wonderland going in through the looking glass. You're like, wow, colors. All of a sudden, everything is brighter and more in focus. And then the song ends and you're back to reality. I had the same experience. So what I'm trying to say is find the music that gives you that experience. Okay. It could be modern music. It could be classic music. It could be classical music. It could be gospel. It could be jazz. It could be anything. And just look for those emotional moments, which is what I try to incorporate in even the music that I create today. You were talking about technology, what it's actually affording us to do. I think this is the best time ever to really express yourself emotionally through music than ever. I'm going to put in my life that I don't have a whole lot of need for survival. And let me clarify this. I've made records that everybody in the band was practicing survival skills. Let's say Mental Health, that record, right? It went on to be the first debut metal record to go to #1. But before it did that, the year prior to that, except for me, Frankie Benelli, Carlos Cavazo, Kevin DuBrow, starving musicians. Then barely had any money to get to the studio. And I say except for me because when I went in to do what eventually wound up being half of the record, I was still a member of Ozzy Osbourne. Right. So my survival was not a financial survival. It was more of an emotional survival. I had just experienced the PTSD of Randy's crash. And I was trying to find a way how to bring joy back into my playing again. Mm-hmm. So I go in that room to record with them. They're starving. I'm starving emotionally, and we make music. And it's a miracle what actually came out of that experience. Miracle enough that it went on the tracks of records that made history for that genre at that time. Okay, fast forward the record. So in 1984, that was recording in late 82. Then we went on tour 83. By 84, we were pulled out of the road because the record company said, listen, you guys released this record over a year and we need to have a record out third quarter of 84. So go ahead. Now, we're not in survival skill anymore financially. No, as a matter of fact, there was a lot of distractions going on because all of a sudden, we got money.
Yeah.
Everybody is occupied buying homes, celebrating, having parties every night at the house, and concentrating on trying to come up with a record that is as big as the one that was made a year and a half ago, which is basically when you make your first record, let's say you're in a rock band, your first record is like the best, your greatest hits from the last 10 years that you've been writing songs.
Exactly.
So you got this catalog of stuff to pull from, right? Second record, especially 40 years ago, it was like, okay, we need some time to write new stuff to really reflect who we are as musicians and human beings at this moment. No, because you only got like 6 weeks to get it done, right? And meanwhile, you're trying to like be a human being. And I was about to get married. I got married in 84. So, I got my family. You're in a bus for like a year and a half together. All of a sudden, you don't even call each other anymore because you're busy doing your own stuff. And then you gather in the studio to write music and no, we're not in sync anymore. Everybody now is in emotional survival mode, not financial survival mode. Mm-hmm. To be creative under such heavy stress is not the best condition to make music.
Now, when you look back over your career, but even Manic Eden and Mars and all the other stuff, what records are you most proud of? Which ones do you like the best?
They all have a certain place in my ups and downs.
Yeah.
Not necessarily career-wise, but path-wise, directions.
Yeah. Artistic.
Or it could be like this. Not necessarily like that. When I recorded the Manic Eden record, that was like 93, 94. Yeah, 93, 94. And it was like this, Whitesnake. I was in Whitesnake, and then we did Slip of the Tongue, 1990. We did the tour, and David Coverdale announced that was going to be the last Whitesnake tour for a while. So everybody, got their affairs together, meaning prepare for the future after Whitesnake. Mine was to put together a new band. I actually got together with the guys, with Tommy and Adrian, and say, listen, why don't we put a band together? And they decided, I want to do this. I want to do that. Eventually, we got together in Manic Eden. But between here and here, everybody else did some other stuff. And so what I did is I put a band called Sun King, which that's where John Five, a 19-year-old John Five, was my guitar player. And Richard Danielson, who is the drummer for Vintage Trouble, was my drummer. And so, so we got some really good players, guys who became, like John Five is one of the best known guitar players, accomplished guitar players today. And grunge happened because that band Sun King was kind of like in my head, the continuation of that 80s Whitesnake and whatever. Sure. And then grunge happened. If I would have really taken some time and thought about it and go, wow, grunge kind of sounds like early Black Sabbath. I did that with Ozzy. I recorded a whole record, Speak of the Devil, all Black Sabbath stuff. I think I know how to do it. And I would have gone in that direction. Some good things will come out. But I didn't. I stuck to my 80s hair metal guns, and I mean, in retrospect, I know where the mistake was, but, I have to move on. So by the time that I did Manic Eden later on, I was kind of like gun shy, shell shocked because I didn't know what to be anymore. I really needed to get an identity. I did not want to be an 80s hair guy anymore because that wasn't hip. That wasn't cool. And for a guy who actually grew up playing such diverse music, I really had my head in a little box.
Yeah,
I really boxed myself in musically. And it took me a while. So making that record and working with a producer named Tom Fletcher, who was actually also a bass player, really helped me out to get out of that very tiny little 80s box that I had put myself in, because it had become my comfort zone,
right?
And my formula for success at a time when the formula did not work anymore. Time for a new formula. Mm-hmm. It's time to be in the present. Time to put it this way, I was trying to create as good or a better future with my past.
Okay.
It was not going to happen because you should not bring your past into your future if you want to create a better future than you had in your past. So that I learned from that.
You know what I think was Blue Murder was caught in the same problem. They were at the end of the hair and the beginning of grunge. And
well, it was all perception. It was the aesthetics. It wasn't really the music. I mean, you know, you can argue that the Beatles and the Stones were hair bands, right? When your parents saw the Beatles, what did they talk about? The hair, right?
Okay.
The performance. I think what happened was, because it was such a performance-based genre, that overshadowed the music. But if you go back and listen, those are brilliant records. They're brilliantly played. They're brilliantly composed. They're brilliantly recorded. They are of their time. Well, so was Jimi Hendrix and Jefferson Airplane were of their time. But I think probably maybe the showmanship maybe deflected on the musical excellence, which to me was always there.
Yeah, musical excellence. But to me, it was more about the structure of the music, the songs. I mean, I can name you top hits that I play on that are purely diatonic. There's no tension and release. It was all release at a time of let's party. It's all release. You know, it's all everything. It's all about, there was no tension. And the first thing that Nirvana did and the whole Seattle scene, it was reintroduce tension to a very tense time. So it made it very realistic and of its time.
Exactly.
Yeah, we're dealing with AIDS. We were dealing with the war in the Middle East. You know, all of these realities. We were getting the news channels like CNN became more part of our life than it did prior to that, because there was no news network.
Right, it was 24 cable. Yeah.
24. And now all of a sudden it's like you are there. You're not just hearing from somebody. There's actually cameras. And 24 hours a day, they're either broadcasting about the AIDS epidemic or war in the Middle East. You need a soundtrack to go with that. And that's what Nirvana did. And the whole grunge, it brought you that reality. It was like, we've been more into reality. That was the birth of the reality shows. When it went from MTV playing videos to having reality shows, you know, because that's what people wanted. They wanted the truth more than that it had been delivered through the media before.
Yeah. And then, of course, social media gave everybody even more of a platform. And now everybody is their own CNN because they have an iPhone.
If you look at the local news, how many iPhone capture video do they show of certain incidents that happen in certain cities? Yeah.
Right.
You know, today's music, there's certain artists that really do reflect that. But then again, if you listen to timeless music, like let's say the Beatles were basically CNN in the 60s. The Doors. All those records, Riders on the Storm, you know, record. I mean, if you look at the, Apocalypse Now, the soundtrack is The Doors, is the Vietnam War. David, you and I, we grew up in an era that we had to take that to the mailbox in the 60s and 70s, waiting for the draft notice.
Yeah.
You know, and then when you did not get the draft notice, you were like, my God, I got one more day to live for sure. Because I lost a lot of schoolmates.
Yeah.
They were drafted. I never saw them again. So we live with that edge, that uncertainty, and the music reflected it. And that's what happened in the 80s. You know, pop rock became this huge release, this huge party.
Escape.
Escape,
the one
completely.
difference, though, the one difference that the 80s music did for me, it was still, we were all based on the blues. Interesting when you think of all the people who played in the 80s bands, they all grew up on Hendrix and the blues. They just took it to another grunge. They were like kids to us. They were listening to after where we were growing up with it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. You know what? Let's say Whitesnake, which was the most blues-based band that I played in because that was the foundation.
Right.
Whitesnake was basically a blues band, and John Colladner signed them before I joined the band. They had one record out before the 87 record. And that was kind of like a release in the UK, and then Colladner released the American version of it, different mixes and things like that. But the strategy was to turn Whitesnake into an MTV band. That's why, even though Tommy Aldridge and I were invited to join Whitesnake in 85, and we declined personally because Whitesnake was the opening band for Quiet Riot in 84. And I witnessed the conflict between the musicians in the band. And when I was asked later to join the band, at that time, there were the elements of the conflict still remain. Mm-hmm. And I said, no, I just left one situation. I don't want to go to another situation. So a couple of years later, in 87, when that record after the 87 album was completed, the only remaining person was David. Yeah. So I felt like, okay, it's safe now because the elements that were a conflict are not there anymore. But the strategy was to put together an MTV-friendly, image-wise. Of course, the guys had to play. That was a given, but there was a lot of musicians that could play back then. But you still have to have the right presentation for the MTV generation. So it was very, I wouldn't say calculated, but it was a decision. There was a strategy behind it. We got these elements. Now, even if you have a strategy, that's not guarantee success, because then you can model anything. You can model anybody else's strategy and be successful. Let's say Jeff Bezos. I want to be just like Jeff Bezos. I'm going to model his strategy. No, it doesn't guarantee success. You have to have the certain ingredients in addition to the strategy to make it a success. Even though it was a blues band, there was a lot of pop-friendly commercial music created. It stopped really being a blues band. It wasn't until 94 when the last time that I toured with Whitesnake, that David actually said, you know what, screw this. I'm going to go back to my blues roots. And he just dug out like catalog of the old Whitesnake. And we mostly play that on tour.
Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah, really good stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
It's funny because I met Chris Rea in Germany. He apparently was David's replacement in an earlier band. I guess it was in Birmingham. And it struck me how different the two of them were. But Chris went back and did like 10 blues records. They just wanted to go back, that blues thing. But I think part of that is we all grew up with the blues. Dino was, one of our... first records, John Mayall.
Yeah.
So it strikes me that, like I said, with grunge, they were listening to what we were doing and they took it back a step further while we were having fun in the 80s.
Yeah.
The 80s were a lot of fun. Spandex, the most forgiving of fabrics.
You still have that in your closet, I'm sure, David.
I still got my red ones. I won't wear them.
Well, let me ask you, David, you found this article in the Huffington Post. Some writer talked about bass players that should be in the Hall of Fame. He mentioned Rudy Sarzo should, for musical excellence. I wonder, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a lot of good things, a lot of controversy about it. But Rudy, is it important for bands to be recognized in that formal way?
Well, business-wise, it's a
big boost business-wise.
It's a big boost. It's a big boost because now then promoters can attach to the bill. Appearing tonight, Heart, Hall of Fame inductees, Heart. Yeah. As a matter of fact, there's tours where you have everybody as a Hall of Famer. Heart, Cheap Trick, Joan Jett.
Yeah.
It's in the business side it is. What's really important to me is that last year, 2020, I was inducted into my college Hall of Fame, because that to me is not based on music. That to me is based on the fact that they gave me an education. I absorbed the information and I was able to utilize it and exceed because of it. And it's kind of like them saying, wow, we gave you this, and by you exceeding from it, you're giving it back to us. So it's basically they're embracing me. It's kind of like a parent being proud of their kids, because they gave me tools that I was able to apply and to succeed with years later. So to get that recognition, like, we gave you the tools, you succeeded, we're going to put you in the Hall of Fame.
Okay.
You did exactly what you were supposed to do. Take what we're giving you and run with it and make something of yourself. I'm sure that you guys teach. Yeah, Randy was so proud of his students when he used to teach at Musonia, because it's all about that. I'm sharing something with you. You're not being my clone. I hope you're not my clone. I hope you can the fact that I am giving you knowledge, do what you creatively, with the knowledge I'm giving you, expand on it and be yourself. Reward me with your own creativity rather than to recreating what I am doing. Don't be me. Be the best that you can be with it, which is what I ask for in anybody that I teach.
Hopefully the vaccine, we can turn the corner. What does 2021, 2022 hold for Rudy? What do you still have to do, Rudy?
A lot of wonderful uncertainties, and I just love it. everything that I've succeeded with has come from the unknown. Just open it and leaving it up to a power greater than me. I did that 40 years ago. 40 years ago, I surrendered my life to God and said, I was sleeping on the floor. And I wrote about this in my book.
Right, off the rails.
Yeah, off the rails. I'm sleeping on my floor, and I had that moment, that epiphany that, you know what, my relationship with God is bigger than anything in my life. This is it. This is what's most important. As long as my fingers keep moving, I keep playing. And that's it. Just like prepare yourself, because wonderful things will come your way. You have to be ready for them. That's it.
I love how you think. I really do. And I got to tell you, I had no idea what this interview would be like. I kept thinking various things. It couldn't have gone any better. I am so thrilled that we finally got a chance to talk. I'm more impressed with you as a human being than as a bass player. This has been a great 2 hours. I thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. It's been such a play. 2 hours? I thought we were just getting started.
Yeah, this is the pre-interview.
I got to get ready for tonight's show.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we are doing
Benny Rietveld from Santana.
Benny Rietveld from Santana and Miles.
Wow. I give him my best. We've crossed paths at NAMM shows a few times.
Yeah, he's amazing.
I'm a huge fan. Yeah. Hey, this is Rudy Sarzo. I want to thank Dave and Tom for the Bass Channel interview that I just did with you guys. Thank you so much.
Perfect.
Look at that, David. See, you always get top billing, Dave. As it should be.
Oh, Jesus. I'm in trouble now.
Where are you guys based out of? What cities?
I'm in a place called the Bronx.
Oh, wow. Heard of it.
And David is in Connecticut. And
oh, wow. Awesome.
We are we are stir crazy from being indoors.
The last time I was at the Bronx, except for traveling by train through it, was to see the Yankees in 1963. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
63, 64, yeah. Double header. Yeah. I still have the...
Roger Maris was still a member?
Roger Maris, Mickey Mantle. Yeah, was that...
Bobby Richardson.
Bobby Richardson. Mel Stottlemyre. Joe Pepitone, first base.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
David still has his baseball cards.
Ken Boyer, third base. Yeah.
That Clete Boyer.
Clete Boyer, his brother Ken.
Was with St. Louis.
Yeah. Ken, yeah.
Let's talk baseball. All right.
Yeah.
Tom Stevens. My generation, the Mets. Anyway. All right, Rudy, great seeing you. Great talk. We got to meet in the flesh after the plague is over. Keep rocking and keep us posted on what you're doing. And we'll let you know when this airs.
Yeah, please, so I can share it in my social media.
We'll do.
All right.
God bless you all.
Adios.
Bye-bye.
Well, that's our show for tonight, folks. Thanks for tuning in. I want to thank Tom Semioli, head honcho of KnowYourBassPlayer.com, and of course, Rudy Sarzo for a great interview. Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you all for listening. Next week, we've got something new, so tune in next Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and you'll find out who we'll be interviewing. Have a great week. See you soon.